Hello everyone, welcome back to another pre-recorded video. In today's video, we're doing our last season preview series video. Today, talking about the last two Atlantic Division teams in the Montreal Canadiens and Toronto Maple Leafs. How they did last year, how they do in the offseason, and how they're shaping up going into this upcoming season. We'll get to all that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another pre-recorded video here at the Intent Hockey Channel. Before we get into the video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all your support. Whenever it's help you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below and don't forget to comment down in the comment section below so you can also listen to this video. Now in today's video, like we said, we're doing the last two teams, which are also the oldest two teams in the NHL, the Habs and the Maple Leafs. Montreal was another team who missed the playoffs last year. Toronto had a pretty good regular season, but bowed out in round one. So talk about both these teams here. We're going to start with the Montreal Canadiens. Last year was a decent season for them. Definitely took a step forward after a rather sour year the year prior, but they did all right last year. They finished with a record of 30, 36, and 16 for 76 points. It was 8th in the Atlantic Division, but 15th in the East and 28th in the NHL, so it wasn't overly bad. It wasn't as bad as teams like the Sharks and the Hawks and the Ducks, but it was a pretty bad season there for the Montreal Canadiens. So interesting note there. They were 236 goals for. That was 26th in the NHL, so they were really bad on the goal scoring side of things. And they were also 289 goals against, 28th in the NHL. So both offense, defense, they were a pretty bad team on both sides of the puck this year for the Montreal Canadiens. If we look at leading point scorers from this past year, Suzuki led the team with 77 points. Not too surprised there. Really good season from Suzuki. On top of that, Caulfield had 65 points, was second on team in point scoring, so he had a pretty good season. And Mike Matheson had 62 points. For a defenseman that was a guy who wasn't traded for very much, Matheson had a brilliant season for the Habs. Goal scoring wise, same two were the top two. Suzuki had 33 goals, Caulfield had 28. They were the two leaders in the goal scoring department. Slafkovsky hitting 20 was third. That was really good. Good to see Slafkovsky take that next step forward for the Montreal Canadiens. Interesting note there. And James Struble was the team's rookie scoring leader. Struble, who had 3 goals, 7 assists, 10 points, was a really good goal scorer there for the Canadiens on the rookie side of things. Struble was a solid third, second pair defenseman last year, depending on injuries. So really good to see him take a little bit of a step forward last year and be the team's rookie leader. So interesting note there. But still, like I said, team wasn't overly good last year. Essentially, they did improve a little bit and got closer to 500. This team was still on the lower end side of things and still in rebuild mode last year. So interesting note there. If you look at what they did this offseason, there's not much to talk about here with the Habs. If you look at their additions, they brought back RFA's Arbor guy and Justin Barron, so good to see those guys get brought back. They also bring in Alex Barre-Boulet from Tampa, so he's going to be a depth forward, not someone who's going to be overly significant for that team. On top of that, they extend both Juraj Slafkovsky and Kane Guhle, who are entering the final year of their deals. I think Slafkovsky got an 8-year deal, Guhle a 6-year deal or something like that, so those are two pretty good extensions there for the Canadiens. Slafkovsky is going to be a really good top 6 forward going forward. Guhle should eventually be a solid top 4, maybe even top pair of defensemen there for the Habs, so pretty good extensions there. You know, if they look at their losses, they had a couple of losses, but then were overly significant. Lost Tanner Pearson to a PTO to Vegas, lost Ylonen to Tampa Bay, lost Elias Anderson to UFA status, Colin White to UFA status, Mitchell Stevens to Seattle, Chris Weidman to retirement, and Matthias Norlinder to UFA status. So a couple of depth defensemen, a handful of depth forwards, nothing really overly significant there for the Habs that they lost. Interesting note there. They traded Jonathan Kovacevic, who was one of their players in the blue line, crowded blue line, so they need to move off some players to New Jersey Devils in exchange for a 2026 4th round pick. So that was an overly bad move there from the Habs. I mean, Kovacevic was a waiver claim, so to get a 4th round pick for him is pretty good. And then they also trade Jordan Harris to the Columbus Blue Jackets in exchange for Patrick Laine and a 2026 2nd round pick. That was their big splash this year. So they acquire Laine, who should be a solid top 6 addition there for the Habs, and a 2nd round pick. So all in all, they weren't too bad this offseason. Made some interesting moves, just not a whole bunch of additions there for the Habs this offseason. If you look at their top 3 picks from this past year's draft, they had 2 1st round picks. 5th overall, they took right winger Ivan Demidov, fell into the Labs at number 5. Really good Russian prospect. Seems like he should probably come over in the next year or two and be a solid top 9, potentially top 6 winger there for the Montreal Canadiens. That's a pretty good pickup there for Montreal. They also get Michael Hage in the 1st round, 21st overall. He's a center prospect, should eventually be a solid 2nd, 3rd line center for that Habs team in a couple of years' time. So interesting note there. And in the 3rd round, 70th overall, the team took Atos Koivu, who I think is the son of former NHLer Mikko Koivu. Should eventually be a solid 3rd, 4th line center. Pretty good pickup there for Habs too. So did have quite a bit of draft capital, made some really good picks there. So interesting note there. 2 biggest questions in my opinion entering training camp for the Habs is 1, which rookies make the defense? They have a lot of young defensemen, Struble, Baron, Xhekaj, Goulet. They also have Malieu. They have Hudson. They have Reinbacher. Like, there's a whole bunch of really good D prospects there for the Habs, so I wonder how their D shapes up going into the season. And two is, does any vet get moved? They have a lot of veteran forwards, guys like Armia, Dvorak, Gallagher, Anderson. There's been a lot of talk about them moving someone before the season starts. So does one of those veterans get moved? That's going to be another interesting question to watch out for. But in my opinion, the two biggest questions for this Habs team entering training camp is, one, what does their blue line look like with some of the younger defensemen maybe making it? And two, does any of those veteran players like Gallagher, Anderson, or Dvorak wind up getting moved before the season starts? Definitely. Those are the two biggest questions in my opinion. Going over to my projected lineup for the Habs for this upcoming season, at this current point in time, I have Slafkovsky playing on line 1 with Suzuki and Caulfield. I have Newhook playing on line 2 with Doc and Laine. I have Owen Beck, who's a rookie, centering line 3 with Dvorak and Anderson. And I have Gallagher, Armia, and Evans on line 4. That's a really good forward group. Defensively, I have Matheson playing with Goulet, I have Hudson playing with Savard in the second pair, and I have Xhekaj playing with Struble in the third pair. I have Montembeault being the 1A starter, I have Primo being the 1B backup, and I have Pezzetta, Barre-Boulet, and Baron starting as the spares. And I also have Raphael Harvey-Pinard being a player who starts on injury reserve, and Carey Price starting on long-term injury reserve, and that would be a cap-compliant roster for the Montreal Canadiens. So that's my opinion on the Habs right now with their lineup. If we go over to my current predictions for the Habs for this upcoming season, at this point in time, I have the Montreal Canadiens finishing quite better than last year. I have them taking a slight bump in points than they did last year, finishing a slight bit higher in the standings than they did last year. So at this point, I have them finishing with 83 points. That's 7 higher than last year, just above 500. And on top of that, I have them getting out of the basement of the Atlantic Division. So I think they're going to have to take a little bit of a step forward this year, going to be above 500. I don't think they're going to be a playoff team. I think it might be close, but I don't think they're going to be a playoff team this year. But I do think they're going to take a major step forward in this rebuild of theirs. So interesting note there, but my current prediction for the Habs is they're going to finish with 83 points, just over 500. Still a handful of points out of a playoff spot, but finish 7 points higher than last year. So that's my current predictions for the Montreal Canadiens. Going over to 3 ways I can see this team improve to get better for next year. 1, growth in the blue line. Like we said, young blue line. So if they can have some growth from some of their blue liners and improve, I think this team could be a lot better than it was last year. 2, more scoring. We talked about this. They were 26th in the NHL in goal scoring last year. They need a lot of their players to get better. Caulfield, Suzuki, can they put up more points? Can Laine have a bounce back season? Can Newhook and Doc stay healthy and put up some really good numbers? Like, they need this team to stay healthy, but also this team needs to also put up some more goals. And 3, their health. The last couple of years, their team has not been overly healthy. So if this team can stay relatively healthy, I think they're going to be a lot better than last year. But if they get injuries like they did last year with guys like Newhook and Doc and all the other guys that suffered injuries last year, they're going to run into a lot of problems again. So my opinion, 3 ways this team can improve is 1, they need growth in that young blue line. 2, more scoring than they did last year. And 3, this team needs to be healthy. So in my opinion, those are the 3 ways this team can improve. Now if we go over to my rating, like I said, they didn't do a whole bunch this past offseason. Added Barre-Boulet, extended a couple of players, made the Harris and Kovacevic moves that acquired them Laine and a couple of draft picks, moved on from a couple of depth players. This team's really young, so they don't really need that much depth. So in my opinion, I'm going to give them a B- rating. I think they had a pretty good offseason. I think the addition of Laine is good. I think the addition of Barre-Boulet will be a decent one. Extending Slafkovsky and Goulet are really good. They do lose a little bit of depth, but you know, I think this team's really young and they're going to have a really good future ahead of them. So I think they can recover from that. So in my opinion, I think they had a really good offseason, and I think they're going to be in a really good position entering this upcoming season. Next, going over to Toronto Maple Leafs. And lastly here, going over to Toronto Maple Leafs. Now for the Leafs, this past year was a really great regular season for them. Finished with a record of 46, 26, and 10 for 102 points. That was good enough for 3rd in the Atlantic, 5th in the Eastern Conference, and 10th in the league. Like, they were a really good team this year. They had 303 goals for, which ended up being 2nd in the NHL, so they were an elite level goal scoring unit this year. While defensively was another story for them, as they gave up 263 goals against, which was tied for 19th lowest in the NHL. So in the bottom half of the goals against department, but an elite offensive unit. So they were a pretty good goal scoring team. If you look at their point scorers, Matthews led the team with 107 points. Once again, really good season there from Matthews, followed by Nylander, who had 98, and Marner, who had 85. So Marner had a little bit of a down year, but still an over point per game season, while Nylander and Matthews were fantastic last year. Matthews hit 69 goals, which also was the goal scoring leader. Won the Rocket Richard and nearly hit 70 goals, which is next to unheard of at this point in time. So Matthews had a phenomenal season goal scoring wise last year. Nylander hit the 40 goal mark, so he had a pretty good goal scoring season last year as well. And Tavares hit 29 goals for. So Tavares was a good top 3 player there for the Leafs, but didn't hit the 30 goal mark, so interesting note there. The rookie scoring leader with Matthew Knies, who had 15 goals, 20 assists, and 35 points. Was a pretty good rookie there for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Interesting note there. Now in the playoffs, like we said, they were the 3rd team in the Atlantic Division, so they faced the 2nd team, which was the Boston Bruins. It was a long series. They dug themselves into a 3-1 hole, forced a Game 7, but in Game 7 in overtime, they wound up losing to Boston. So it was another bad series in the first round where they lost to Boston, and it was a series where they could have potentially won that series, but they weren't able to. So it was an interesting series there. Their point scoring leaders in the playoffs were Tyler Bertuzzi, Max Domi, and Austin Matthews, who all had 4 points, while their goal scoring leaders were William Nylander, who had 3 goals, and Matthew Knies, who had 2 goals. So interesting note there. I'm a little bit surprised that some of the other guys, like their bigger players, weren't higher on the list, but interesting note there that Nylander and Knies were the 2 highest goal scoring players in the playoffs for the Leafs. Interesting note there. If you look at their additions and losses from this past year, it was interesting to see what they did. If you look at their additions, they brought back Max Domi, Connor Dewar, Alex Steeves, Nick Robertson, at least for the time being, Timothy Liljegren, and Matt Murray. So they brought back a lot of players. They wound up also bringing in via free agency Oliver Ekman-Larsson on a 4-year deal. Former Cup winner with the Florida Panthers this past year. He should be a solid addition on the defensive end. They also bring in defenseman Jani Hakanpää, who should be a solid 3rd pair defenseman, Dakota Mermis, and Felipe Meyer. So they bring in some decent defensemen. Also bring in Anthony Stolarz to basically be the backup now for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So that could be a really good pickup there for Toronto. And they extend Joseph Woll on a 3-year deal. So now they have Woll signed for the next 4 seasons. So that's a pretty good pickup there for Toronto Maple Leafs. Meanwhile, if you look at their losses, it's a pretty big list. They lose Tyler Bertuzzi to Chicago. He was a really good top 6 forward last year. Depth forwards, Dylan Gambrell goes to Columbus. Gregor goes to Ottawa. So they lose some forwards. They lose a whole bunch of defensemen. TJ Brodie goes to Chicago. John Klingberg's a UFA. Joel Edmundson goes to LA. Ilya Lyabushkin goes to Dallas, Max Lajoie goes to Seattle, and Mark Giordano is currently UFA, so they do lose a lot of depth on the blue line. They also lose Ilya Samsonov, who goes to Vegas. That's why they need a new backup. And they lose Martin Jones, who's currently UFA. So a lot of interesting losses there. Add some pretty good players. Extend Joseph Woll, which is really good. So interesting movement there in the free agency market. Made one trade. It wasn't an overly big trade. They trade Max Ellis' signing rights and the 2026 7th round pick, Toronto's, to the Dallas Stars in exchange for signing rights to Chris Tanev, and eventually signed Tanev to a 6-year deal. So it was an interesting sign there for the Leafs, but that's a pretty good deal to get Tanev from Dallas a little bit ahead of free agency. So some interesting moves there from the Toronto Maple Leafs. If for the top 3 picks in this past year's draft, in the first round, 31st overall, they took Ben Danforth, who's a right shot defenseman. Could eventually be a solid second pair defenseman there for the Leafs. That's a pretty good pickup there. In the 4th round, 120th overall, they took Victor Johansson. Johansson, who's a left shot defenseman. Really good player there for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Could eventually be a solid 3rd pair defenseman there for the Leafs. It's a really good pickup. And in the 5th round, 151st overall, they took Miroslav Holinka, who's a center. Could eventually be a solid 3rd, 4th line player there for the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's another pretty good pickup there for the Leafs in the draft. Didn't have much draft capital, but really did well on the picks they had. So interesting note there. If we look at the 2 biggest questions for the Toronto Maple Leafs entering this offseason, it's 1, will Robertson be moved by the Toronto Maple Leafs? There's a lot of talk right now concerning Robertson and potentially him being moved. He wants a fresh start. So is Robertson going to get moved at some point by the Toronto Maple Leafs, or is he still going to be on the roster to start the season? That's a big question. And 2, will Easton Cowan make the team? Cowan had a fantastic junior year last year. Some people think it's a possibility that Cowan could make the team. Could Cowan make the team for the Toronto Maple Leafs this year? I think it's definitely a possibility with how well he played in juniors. So interesting note there. My 2 biggest questions entering training camp is 1, will Robertson be moved? And 2, will Cowan make the team? So those are 2 interesting things when it comes to entering training camp. If you look at my current projected lineup for the Toronto Maple Leafs for this upcoming 24-25 season, at this point, I have Easton Cowan playing on line 1 with Austin Matthews and William Nylander. I have Knies playing on line 2 with Tavares and Marner. I have line 3 being Robertson with Domi and Yarncroke, and line 4, McMahon with Holmberg and Dewar. So that would be a really good forward group in my opinion. Defensively, I have Riley with Tanev, Oliver Ekman-Larsson with Timothy Liljegren, and McCabe with Benoit. That is a solid defensive core. In the spare category, I have David Kampf and Jani Hakanpää. That would be decent spares for the Leafs. I have Woll being the 1A, Stolarz being the 1B, and with all of that, they would have a cap compliant roster. It will be tight, but they would have a cap compliant roster. So interesting note there, but that's a pretty good lineup there for the Toronto Maple Leafs. If you look at my current predictions for the Toronto Maple Leafs for the upcoming 24-25 season, I'm pretty high on the Maple Leafs. I think they improved their defense. Their offense didn't get much worse besides the loss to Bertuzzi. Their goaltending got a little bit better in my opinion with the addition of Stolarz. So in my opinion, I think the Leafs are going to get a little bit of a bump from last year. I think they're going to finish with 110 points. That's 8 higher than last year, and that would be top in the Atlantic Division. So I do currently have the Leafs being the winners of the Atlantic Division. Wouldn't be overly surprised if they maybe finished a tiny bit lower than that, but I think they're poised for a bigger season than they had last year, and I think they can win the Atlantic Division this year. So interesting note there, but I do think that the Leafs will take a little bit of a step forward, have 8 points higher than last year, and be with 110 points, be the Atlantic Division winner. So that's my current projections for this upcoming season for the Maple Leafs. 3 ways I can see this team improve is 1, consistent goaltending last year due to injuries, also due to inconsistent goaltending. Samsonov, Murray, Woll weren't overly consistent last year, so Woll's looked really good. So if he can stay healthy and Woll and Stolarz give this team consistent goaltending, this team should be a lot better than last year. 2, better defense. Last year their defense was awful. Now you can blame some of that on injuries, but this defense was just an awful defense last year for the Maple Leafs. So if they can have a better defense, I think this team will be a lot better and should be able to improve. And 3, they need to keep up this offense. Last year they were top 3 in the offensive category. If they can remain a top 5 team offensively this year, they should be able to remain a solid team in the standings and might be able to improve a little bit more. So in my opinion, the 3 biggest ways that this team can improve is 1, have consistent goaltending from Woll and Stolarz. 2, have a really better defense than they had last year, and 3, keep the offense going the way it was last year. And I think those ways they can improve to be better than last year. Now going over to my current rating for the Toronto Maple Leafs for this past year. Now, like we said, did make a whole bunch of moves, made 1 trade which was really good for them, added a couple players in free agency, lost a lot of depth in free agency. So I think they did all right. They got a little bit better. Not going to say they won free agency or anything because they did lose quite a bit of players, but I do think they got a little bit better, especially on the blue line. So in my opinion, I'm giving them a C+. I could have given them a B-, but I think a C+ was a little bit more warranted here. Made some interesting moves, improved that blue line, but I do think they lost a little bit of depth. So I'm going to say that they improved in the offseason, but definitely didn't win it. So in my opinion, that's my opinion on the Leafs at this current point in time. But definitely, that's all I'm going to talk for today. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on the Leafs and the Habs down in the comment section below. How do you think they did last year? Do you think these 2 teams improved or got worse in the offseason? And how do you think they're going to do entering the 24-25 season? Can the Habs take a step forward? Could the Habs be a playoff team? And what about the Leafs? Do you think the Leafs are going to be able to win the Atlantic Division? Definitely, have your thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. So I'm going to talk for today. For this latest video, if you're listening, subscribe down below. Thank you for all your support. We're never to all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget the subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below. So it's going to also this next video. Also a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So check that out. Leave a link down in the description below. And can't see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.